Okay, awesome. So this is going to be a discussion of autistic and neuroqueer poetry with special guest Nathan Spoon. I had the honor of meeting Nathan Spoon in person this year, and Nathan was doing a forum where I learned a new word, which is neuroqueer. And I had a chance to read a little bit more about neuroqueer. Neuroqueer is a term that was coined maybe in 2008, but it sounds like there's kind of a confluence of many people starting to think like this. But Nick Walker is often credited with it. And Nick Walker included neuroqueer in her grad school paper. And then many years later, kind of came back to it through connection with other folks. Neuroqueer is difficult to define because it is about subverting definitions, concepts, and authority. But just from the essay, Nick Walker attempts to provide a definition of neuroqueer as the practice of queering, subverting, defying, disrupting, liberating oneself from neuronormativity and heteronormativity simultaneously. Um, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the language because I know that was something that people have brought up. Like, what is neuronormativity? What is heteronormativity? Why are we thinking about this intersection of queerness and neurodivergence and like what does neurodivergence mean? So Nathan, not to put you on the spot, but any perspective that you want to add to this, because I mean you've done a whole forum on this before. So curious what your thoughts are on like if somebody's like, what's neuroqueer? Like kind of where do you begin? How do you talk about it? I think you are still muted. Also, anyone's welcome to jump in.
Oops. So I was like totally into the conversation and didn't even think to unmute myself. But or just what you were saying. But yeah, I think you described it pretty well. Um I, uh, Dr. Walker also like she also talks about um uh, neuroqueer as uh, um, like in the more active sense of neuroqueering, which I think that the short definition that you gave uh, touched on that. And after going through sort of a range of possible ways of looking at the term, I think the best thing that I took from her essay is when she said, "You're neuroqueer if you're neuroqueer." So like it's something that you kind of know and connect with. So maybe um, that's a good starting point, and then I'll also talk about it sometimes as sort of like sorry, I've got this insect flying around. If you see a tiny friend flying by, um, um, but basically, I, I'd kind of think of, and I'm not sure what Nick Walker or Remy Urgo or other folks who have written academically using the term neuroqueer would uh, what they would think of this, but also sort of look at it as expanding the conceptualization of queer and adding um, y- variations of neurodiversity as a potential um, um, well, I'm kind of losing my words, which is easy for me to do, but like um, perhaps like an additional category to categories of and conceptualizations of queerness that are generally more familiar. Um,
Yeah, I agree.
yeah,
And I think one thing that Nick Walker says in the essays is kind of challenging, like creating a normal, right? There's no normal mind. There's no normal way for somebody to be attracted to somebody else or to no normal way to have a gender identity, or it's just kind of like walking all of that back, and I feel like that was kind of the connection for me between, something like autism or neurodivergence and queerness is that you're queering it, like you said, it's a verb before it's an adjective. You're actively questioning like whatever people are trying to define as normal. And you might be in a minority sometimes in terms of how you process things or how you relate to other people. Um, anyway, but so you used a lot of language there like neurodiversity, um, and neurodivergent. And sometimes I've heard people say like neurodiversity is when people can just be anyway, and includes people who are not autistic too.
right.
And then neurodivergent is like specifically talking about things like ADHD and autism and like other
Mhm.
sort of different ways of being that maybe put you in the minority. But it's not abnormal to be in a minority. Everybody's in different kinds of minorities, right? Like you're having a full experience. And for me, like realizing that, like it's not about thinking who's normal or abnormal. It's about thinking like we're all part of minorities in different ways and that it's diverse. But does anybody else want to say
I
kind
have,
of introductory remarks?
I just have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question. I like when you say somebody is querying, like that's a verb, like you're actively questioning or struggling against entrenched social norms or this kind of thing. And that is that like it's assumed you're doing this if you're neuroqueer or in group or you're it's an individual struggle or you do it in conjunction with others or is that assumed like that you're involved in some kind of struggle against social norms or whatever you perceive as oppressive social guidelines or try to usurp the old order or whatever. Do you understand what I'm asking? Is that an assumption? This is a verb, neuroqueering, right?
I do think it's like one example that comes to mind is thinking about dyslexic poets. So for me, the emergence of the modernist episteme basically, sort of opened up an opportunity where if you look at a writer who was in many ways a modern poet, William Butler Yeats, he's lar generally thought of. I know had an opportunity to meet a scholar from Oxford University who was very familiar with sort of the behind the scenes to his poetry material, and he would sometimes like he would regularly misspell words or write things ungrammatically in letters, and this bug is going to like eat my face off in front of you all. But but um, anyway, Yeats he would the scholar was saying that he would also sort of randomly seem to fuse words together, and it would be hard to tell even within the context like what exactly was he what did he mean to write instead of the thing that he did write. And I remember, I can't remember the exact sort of like, it wasn't even a word, like what he had actually written, that this Yates scholar was talking about. But and then also he did sort of a cold inquiry, I would assume early on in his career, where he was inquiring at the university, I'm not sure which one, about possibly coming there to teach. And in his um, sort of cold inquiry letter that he wrote, he misspelled the word professor. He was asking if he might be a professor, and he misspelled the word. But all of like the aspect of his dyslexia is excised out of his poetry. Like everything's spelled and punctuated nicely in his poetry, which makes it in that sense fit more with sort of a traditional episteme. But if you look at a poet like E. Cummings in contrast, um, Cummings was there's another scholar who sort of like has lived her academic life at the University of Oxford, J. Alison Rosenblatt. She did undergrad, graduate, um, PhD, and is now teaching at one of the colleges there. And she wrote a long monograph on Cummings, published also through University of Oxford Press. I think that it's hilarious that like so much of what she's done has been through this one institution. But anyway, that in the introduction to this uh, long book on Cummings, she mentions his, what she's very much suspected was dyslexia from looking at his writing, where he would, writing by hand, for example, he would start too far in from the left margin, and then he would be writing too big. So he had poor spatial planning as he was writing words across the page, and he would start to write the letters smaller and smaller, and then he would run out of room and kind of like go up the the right margin of um, the page. You kind of like um, uh, a child might do. And anyway, getting into a lot of like autistic person detail, but anyway, Rosenblatt collaborated with a scholar who specialized in giving dyslexia assessments and diagnoses, and they went over his material in detail and wrote a collaborative paper, um, putting forward that he was very likely um, mildly to moderately dyslexic. And I think sort of in contrast to um, Yeats, the way that Cummings would, you see the letters of words spilling down the page. His po famous poem Grasshopper, which has all the letters of the word grasshopper out of order. I think you can find it just by, Googling E. Cummings and grasshopper. But the title's misspelled. Words are jumping through each other in terms of how the text is presented. And I think that he's largely been read as a poet who was sort of playful in how he presented language. But I think that this, sort of zeroing in on him as a dyslexic poet allows for a lot of opportunity to sort of reread and rethink what he was doing. That and my thought is that uh, uh, he engaged with language, uh, you know, in a way that went against the traditional episteme that Yates stuck with more in terms of how he put his language forward. Um, uh, Cummings took a different approach, and um, that allowed him to put more details of what his experience with language was like into his poetry and sort of share his experience in ways that y- you I think that you can still look at Yeats uh, through like in terms of his dyslexia, but there's a lot to me in Cummings that sort of shows the as a dyslexic person myself, like the experience of processing language. Uh, Cummings very much shares that and the poetry beyond the things that he's talking about in individual poems.
That's amazing. I actually didn't realize that about E. E. Cummings, but that makes so much sense. E. E. Cummings is buried in Forest Hill Cemetery, not too far of a walk from where I live, and I've been to his grave many times and read his work, and I'm so influenced by E. E. Cummings. And I think what we see in these examples that you shared with us is that the way that the poet is neurodivergent is contributing to creativity. It's changing our relationship to language. It's making more experiments possible. In the interest of time, I want to make sure that um, Nathan, we get a chance to hear a couple poems by you. I usually do a screen share. Um, is that okay?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I just said all that just to say that I think that Cummings very much demonstrated neuroqueering. Without him, um, he didn't have to have the term to be doing it.
Yeah, that's another good point because I many people in this group have discussed already that like growing up they didn't have these terms. I mean, I didn't have these terms either. But it's amazing the younger generation has been able to have this term, and the term neuroqueer wasn't even invented until I graduated from college. But you exist even without these terms, right? You exist as you are, and maybe it comes into different form depending on what language is possible for the era in which you live. I don't know what other people think. Um, well, we can think more on that. But we're so honored to have Nathan Spoon joining us. Nathan Spoon um has an incredible body of work. Will continue to create more work. And was wondering, Nathan, do you have a preference of what poem you start with? I shared a couple of your poems that are on Poetry Foundation. Um, what we usually do is like read the poem twice so we can really process it. And if you want someone else to read it, we can do that. If you want to read it first and someone else read it, or you can let us know kind of what you prefer.
Um, is somebody else willing to read this one? And I don't mind reading it, but if somebody would
Um,
like to,
If you read it first, maybe I'd be willing to read it second, but I want to know how you pronounce and
sh-
what you accentuate.
all right. Um,
can everybody see it okay? I'll scroll down at some point. Sorry, that might be a little annoying, but I'll just do the best I can.
So this is called Bee Monster. All mouth, out of orbit due to an insatiable need to be orbited. At some point, there are clouds or waves filled with the foul kelp of cornering questions. Like a black hole eating a star through space, it was real when Monster queried, "Why do you think you carry a small stack of books with you?" Out of orbit is perhaps a phantasmagoria of blankness. It was real when the foolishness I was meant to feel oozed from the kelp instead. What I carried out of my own need was innocuous enough. It felt how pages smelled as I turned them. Like Don Quixote made a helmet, I wanted to make the books, with their sturdy covers, a shield. I succeeded, almost. Almost, except an impulse rose as I walked starrily away from Monster. Almost, except it is impossible to protect what I was protecting indefinitely. Naivety that is ready to crumble does. When it crumbles, its pieces fall into a womb where the thing most feared gestates. All mouth, all hunger, all claw, all tooth, all stir of disorder I now will be, hidden and large, large, large as the thick-haired ocean of space.
Wow. Thank you for reading that. I think Michael Igo is going to take a stab at it too. And
Sure.
we do this to help with processing, and we recognize the density of what we're encountering here.
Yeah, that's a really impressive work. They reminds me of Ginsberg's poem, "The Million-Eyed Monster." I think it's Wichita Vortex Sutra.
Oh,
The
I'm familiar with
Million-Eyed
the
Monster.
poem.
Yeah, Bee Monster. All mouth, out of orbit due to an insatiable need to be orbited. At some point, there are clouds or waves filled with the foul kelp of cornering questions, like a black hole heaving a star through space. It was real. When monsters queried, "Why do you think you carry a small sack of books with you?" Out of orbit is perhaps a phantasmagoria of blankness. It was real when the foolishness I was meant to feel oozed from the kelp instead. What I carried out of my own need was innocuous enough. It felt how pages smelled as I turned them. Like Don Quixote made a helmet. I wanted to make the books with their sturdy covers, a shield. I succeeded almost. Almost, except, can you scroll down? An impulse rose as I walked starrily away from a monster. Almost, except that it's impossible to protect what I was protecting indefinitely. Naivety that are ready to crumble does. When it crumbles, its pieces fall into a womb where the thing most feared gestates. All mouth, all hunger, all claw, all tooth, all stirrer of disorder. I will now be hidden in the large as the thick haired ocean of space.
Thanks for reading that a second time, Michael. That was really helpful. Okay, so what we usually do is we kind of throw it out there and we say, what are the things that people are feeling or responding to with this poem? Um, Feel free, anyone can jump in. Also, if you have questions for the poet, we can actually do that now. So,
I had a question for Nathan. The very March, if you can scroll down to the very last part of it. Yeah, the all mouth, all hunger, all claw, all tooth. Did you have Darwinism in mind? The tooth and
Uh,
claw, or no?
no, no, not in any sort of direct way. Like, could have been just sort of embedded in how things are coming to mind without me um, thinking about it directly.
Okay. Yeah, because that's a very famous quote of Darwin, tooth and claw. Nature, I don't know the whole quote, but tooth and claw, how it just is nature.
I'm making a note so I can look it up.
Yeah.
That's a good point, though, because I really thought about how many natural elements are coming in such bizarre, mystical ways in
Mm.
this poem. And I feel like a world is being created and also transcended at the same time. The beginning of the poem, out of orbit due to an insatiable need to be orbited, feels absurd and funny and reminds me of Hannah Emerson a little bit in some of the theme because we're sort of like decentering, we're getting to the periphery, right? And Hannah Emerson also celebrates that. And anyway, just throwing that out there that I love that there's a question in this poem too. I put a lot of questions in my poems. Like I have trouble being neuroqueer without asking a million questions.
And that question is really an innocuous kind of, well, it's probing, but it's innocuous. And coming from a monster, this kind of bland question is kind of, it strikes me as odd. It's incongruous. Wouldn't expect that from monsters asking me what they might demand things or threaten me, but why do I think I carry a small sack of books? But when I was reading that, when I got to the middle, it started. There was a rhythm to it. It was kind of like a sing song, and I picked up on it and I continued with it. I tried to. The midsection of the poem, and just for my not kelp is like kale, right? It's similar like kelp,
Seaweed.
seaweed. Yeah, kale is the same kelp.
Yeah, there is a lot of imagery of nature and ocean and things like that and outer space, but then there's also a lot that refers to books and words. And so there's a lot of worlding happening in terms of language as a world and nature as a world. Cool. Do people have more comments or want to discuss this poem a little bit more?
Yeah, I'm interested in the title. The title is what imperative. It's like the poet commanding the audience to be a monster. And then the body of the poem is like a switch from that to the sort of more normal indicative. And I'm wondering what that's about. Why is that happening?
Oh, and Jen.
Oh, you want? Okay, I didn't know if Charles was done. I was just curious because my brain works in 1,000 different directions all the time. I never sleep. But I really appreciated this poem. Just because I have been too afraid because of like I didn't even realize that I had dyslexia till late either, but explains a lot. But I was so afraid because I started into like a poetry community before I went to academia when I was 35 and then got out of academia in 2022 for reasons. But so I've had a little bit of a balance, but I was always so afraid in a lot of like workshops and classes because I had like the line breaks kind of kicked out of me that I should control poems in such a way to make them more like the lines have to end on a specific kind of word, like it has to be a descriptive word, or it has to be a really punchy word, or it has to be like the formatting has to, all the lines have to meet. And I really love this poem because I don't know about anybody else, but it gave me a little bit of permission because I sat with it, I read it a few times, and I'll probably read it several more, but I really appreciated the fact that the line breaks were like they were inconsistent, but they were that way for a purpose, at least in my brain. And so I just wanted just to show some appreciation from someone who is also dyslexic, because I'm actually going to play around with this style. So I just wanted to like point that out. I don't know if it was intentional based on like the way that your brain works with formatting and the way that the poem came out. But it's, to me, it's always interesting to break out of my own molds, and I just wanted to bring that part up because I like that you have lines that land on like orbit and clouds, but you also have some that you know, land on things that may not have been considered as punchy to some people in like some circles or what have you. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah, I'm very interested, Nathan, in kind of how you learned this approach to writing. Its craft and its form and its meaning all coming together. Um, I know you had mentioned kind of a non-traditional path to learning and education and how that kind of affects, I mean, you're writing about monster, right? And like how is monster kind of an otherness that you're exploring and how that pertains to kind of your own path as a poet?
I think in this poem, it's um, I really had in mind the like the experience as a neurodivergent person of being seen by a majority of other people as alien or perhaps monstrous. But this poem is touching on by know, initially presenting, um, this figure who's just called Monster, who's asking this question that's then described as a cornering question. So it's not a sincere question, but it's a question that's meant to say you shouldn't be doing the thing that you're doing. And it's a personal thing for me. Like as an autistic person, I love books. I've loved them since childhood, and I'll go to the grocery store like holding a couple of books in my hand. Like I'm a person who walks around with books pretty regularly. Like it helps me to feel calm and regulated in pretty much any kind of environment. And I'll be at Walmart and I'm the only person in the entire building holding a book. But I also have my phone now too, so that's sort of my main fidget. Um, but I suppose the thing that I found myself thinking as I was writing the poem, um, and another strange thing about how my brain works is everything is very much sort of like the way that a gymnast, for example, will practice a routine. So when I write a poem, I just write it straight through beginning to end, and then I don't work on it. So it's more something that, um, I think, Michael was mentioning the Ginsberg poem. Uh, Ginsberg's poetry, whether or not he would, sort of write things straight through. It definitely has the feeling, and that was sort of the idea with beat poetry to convey something that had a kind of spontaneity, composed spontaneity, but the trajectory that came to me as was writing along was one of sort of like calling what seems like this externalized experience of other people kind of being monstrous towards you by calling you the monster or the strange person. And then the poem, I suppose what I was going for in it, as you get into the end of the poem, um, it kind of goes in a circle from this, imagery of the ocean and of space to the imagery of a womb, and sort of owning the concept of um, that monster that may be so unpleasant to experience. I have, the claw and the tooth, and I have the capacity to be the monster too. So when I got to the end, I then went back up to the top of what I was writing and um, decided to call it Be a Monster. Like often the last thing that I do is add the title. Um, I don't know if that that made much sense what I just said, but
Yes, thank you so much. Jen, did you still have a hand up? You're
No, I'm good. That was an accident. Sorry.
okay, no problem. Um, I just realized Amelia put in the chat, the which pertains to Decker's question. Nature is red in Tooth and Claw by Tennyson.
Mm.
Um, thank you. That's an interesting reference. Um, do people have other thoughts and comments about this poem? Or we can also go to the next if we are ready for that. Great. So we will probably not get to all of the poems shared. Nathan had so many wonderful suggestions, but even if we don't get to everything, I highly suggest people check out those poems, which are on the Facebook invite. Nathan, would you like to do Abraham Lake next, or do you want to skip ahead to anything? We're very flexible.
Sure, we can do that one. And I also like I posted about the that poem, Squishmallow poem, and you
I
asked
really,
to
really
get to
like that one,
that.
actually. Yeah, that one too. It's so hard to pick. Um, yeah, but do you have any preference between that one and Abraham Lake? I mean, I think we can do one more and then we'll do one by Hannah Emerson.
But you pick.
Okay, I'm gonna pick the Squishmallow one just because that like it just really helped me understand like neuroqueer poetry in a new way. If I go to your Facebook, will I find it or
Yes. Yeah, like you should be able to screen share the image. I can also put like an image in the chat. But
okay, I just for the interest of, being careful what I'm sharing here, I just I stopped the screen share and I'm just trying to pull it up now. But yeah, if you put it in the chat, that might be faster. Let me know if that works for you or not. But I'll look for it.
let's see.
Yeah, I was so excited. When did you get that one published? It was really recent, right?
Yeah, it just came out about a week ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Um,
Oh, no.
I'm looking for it on. Oh, I found it. I found it. It's on your Facebook. All right. I think I can. Oh, it's a little bit blurry. Mm, hmm.
Oh, I can share from my computer.
Okay, I will enable you to share it because that might work better.
Let's see. Well, I'm putting it in the chat. I've never done screen share before. It might take me a
Oh,
minute.
okay, perfect. I can do it.
Let's see.
Is the
Oh, here it is. Is that less blurry?
Okay, so you put it in the chat. Let me find it.
We can open it.
I
Okay,
can see it, but it's kind of small.
all right. I was able to open it.
Yeah, if you double click on it, it will come up big.
Oh, yeah, I see it now.
Okay, are y'all able to see it on now too?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Nathan, would you mind reading this? And then somebody will probably read it a second time.
Alrighty. And does everybody know what a squishmallow is?
Well,
No,
No,
So let me see if I can get one here.
I know a checker mallow, but not a squish mallow.
Yeah, I actually have one. So it would be, I guess it's blurry because I've got my background blurred, but it's like this little kind of, yeah, squishy. This is a dinosaur. So they're, it's something that's, for a lot of neurodivergent people, it's kind of like soft and smushy. Could be like it's just a nice sort of sensory thing. Um, so that's, the title comes from, I really need the company that does Squishmallows to sponsor my, poems that I write in the future because I put their brand in the title of my poem. But anyway, this is called Squishmallow Poem. I don't care about seeing the sun again, so long as I have a place to walk and so long as the forward feature is growing. I'll grow up and start acting my age after I've had the rest of my life to unmask more. The thing about masking is you keep doing it even as you are undoing it. Besides, everybody knows you can't cut the head off a thing that doesn't have one. All you can do, once you're in its jaws, is look on in awe and clap more. You want what you want, and that's all right, and not your fault. But I have a heart with rows of the most dazzling teeth. Living takes a lifetime for all of us. Teeth in your heart, swear it.
Thank you. Tiffany, would you mind reading that again for us so we can process it?
Will do. Squishmallow poem. I don't care about seeing the sun again, so long as I have a place to walk and so long as the forward feature is growing. I'll grow up and start acting my age after I've had the rest of my life to unmask more. The thing about masking is you keep doing it even as you are undoing it. Besides, everybody knows you can't cut the head off a thing that doesn't have one. All you can do once you are in its jaws is look on in awe and clap more. You want what you want, and that's all right and not your fault. But I have a heart with rows of the most dazzling teeth. Living takes a lifetime for all of us. Teeth in your heart, swear it.
Great. Thank you for reading that a second time. Do people have parts that are standing out to them, lines that stand out to them, or sort of immediate reaction from reading this?
living takes a lifetime for all of us. Really like that line.
Yes, agreed. I like talking about masking and unmasking, and the thing about masking is you keep doing it even as you are undoing it.
I'm also glad you showed what the squishmallow was, because now I can understand the lines about you can't cut the head off a thing that doesn't have one, and also the rows of the teeth.
Yeah, I guess it is, something of a description of like this actual squishmallow that I have. It's the only one that I have. Um, and it didn't occur to me that I was giving a description of, that seems fairly close to the specific one that I have.
Mm.
Yeah. I
I
kind
found,
of, oh, sorry. You can go
sorry.
first.
Well, I thought that it was, it starts with this quietness and softness, but it kind of ends. I mean, every once in a while, there's a little bit of a twist that gets a little harsher. And we cannot think of teeth without thinking of their possibility as weapons, right? Or something threatening. And it ends with that sharpness. I mean, it starts soft, but then there is this real, I don't want to say threat, but something sharp at the end that makes the poem really work, but also makes the emotions kind of conflicted for the reader.
I kind of see this poem as like it feels like kind of like an act of like defiance and freedom. I think I can really feel like the time in this poem, or just kind of like almost like the years that have been kind of taken off of the of the person's life, kind of from masking and kind of and from trying to like adhere and conform to like like neurotypical life. And I like kind of like, I think the inclusion of the squishmallow is important because it's like that's that's something for autistic people that's just like it's it's a sensitivity thing, and it's something that kind of provides a lot of comfort, but also is kind of a thing that you know it may kind of, for some people, may look a little like infantile or kind of childish, but it is something that like for someone with a lot of sensitivity, it's like it kind of replenishes you, I think. And that's kind of what I'm getting from it, is just kind of like this feeling of like I'm going to I'm going to like live as myself, and kind of find that sort of uh kind of find that sort of agency, and kind of find like that own like personal freedom. um yeah.
Great. Do people have
I
any?
thought much along the same lines as Amelia about I that's a forgiving. Before that line about the heart with rose of the most dazzling teeth, it's a forgiving statement. It seems like he's giving himself, he cut himself some slack, or he's cutting everybody some slack. You want what you want, and that's all right, and not your fault. And then, but he's kind of that it, but it's not a statement. It's although I have a heart with rose, and I took those. It seems ominous, an ominous statement that. And I thought of teeth as there's some aggression involved. There's some biting or attacking. That teeth, yeah, they signify. And so much of these poems is caught up with like animal life that I immediately thought of some kind of aggression. That in my heart, there's some kind of ability to attack or something.
Yeah, that resonates with what Amelia put in the chat as well, that, you know, you might be soft, but there's some kind of sharpness inside. And Jen, I'm reading now your comment about unmasking. Yeah, I think unmasking is an interesting concept that I only learned kind of recently. And it's a good example that you could be actively doing something like masking without knowing. You know, there's a whole process of awareness. And I'm still trying to become aware of like what is neuroqueer, you know. So I think poems like this bring it into awareness without simplifying the experience. All right. We are going to read a poem by Hannah Emerson. It's relatively short. I'm just pulling that up now. There are so many great poems that Nathan suggested, and if you all have time and are interested in this topic, definitely suggest checking out some of the other options that we might not get to, that are listed here. And then also, if you're interested, we have a neuroqueer introduction and a neuroqueer essay by Nick Walker. So feel free to check that out if you get a chance. This is a poem by Hannah Emerson called Peripheral. Is there anyone who really would like to read it for us?
It's not on the screen. I don't see it.
Oh, I think it's on the screen, but if nobody can see it, I will have to stop my screen share and just restart.
Yeah, all I see is the Squishmallow poem.
Okay, no problem. I'm gonna stop my share and just redo that. Okay. Are you able to see it now?
Yep.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. This is a short poem. It's called Peripheral by Hannah Emerson. Hannah Emerson has quite a bit of work available online. I know I purchased one of the books or chapbooks from a website before and read it for when I was doing the Seeley Challenge, and it was a really interesting read. Um, but yeah, does anybody feel like reading a short poem for us?
I can read it.
Thank you.
So peripheral. Yes, I prefer the peripheral because it limits the vision. It does focus my attention. Direct looking just is too much killing of the moment. Looking oblique littles the moment into many helpful moments. Moment, 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 keep in the moment.
Thank you. I'll read it a second time. Peripheral by Hannah Emerson. Yes, I prefer the peripheral because it limits the vision. It does focus my attention. Direct looking just is too much killing of the moment. Looking oblique littles the moment into many helpful moments. Moment, 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 moment. Keep in the moment. I love how experimental this is, and I used to be obsessed with Gertrude Stein. And I think that something about focusing on neuroqueer poetry leads us toward the experimental, leads us to kind of leap into different directions. And I'm really interested in this idea of the peripheral and like decentering, you know, because when you center something, you kind of create um like a focus on how most people experience something, but when you look at the peripheral, you get to experience things outside of the most people. And um I think it invokes neurodivergence in that way for me. But I don't know, what are people's connections with this?
I think it's the one of the absolute best thing I have seen to describe that that look when my students that were in the spectrum but deep, right? Not just peripherally so, but had such trouble making eye contact, but we could smile so much when there was that peripheral glance. So I always had, with a couple of my kids, I had candies, and being at the periphery of their vision, they will always look at my hands to see if I had a candy, and this thing brought it home so beautifully. And I look up at Hannah Emerson, and she does not speak. Uh, so I don't know. The whole thing was very moving.
I really love the sentence, looking oblique littles the moment into many helpful moments, because it's kind of um, like putting forward the idea of like if you're looking at a plate of food, like you wouldn't try to eat it all in one bite, like so that you can take it in, perhaps enjoy it. You know eat it one bite at a time, and also to me, like it sort of um, I don't know if anybody has watched this documentary that was on Netflix. It's gone off, but it's really worth um, uh, finding a way to access it and watch it if you can. I actually have it um, right here at my desk, but it's a documentary called The Reason I Jump, and it follows um, a handful of non-speaking autistic people. And The Reason I Jump is a memoir written by a Japanese uh, boy, and uh, his, like, I guess passages from the book translated to English are used to sort of connect the different non-speakers. And one of the things that is narrated from this young man as he's describing, um, and David Mitchell, who ends up translating the author David Mitchell, who translates the Japanese text into English. Um, uh, but he's sort of commenting on how this boy Naoki Higashida, um, to understand that it's raining, he has to go through all of these steps, and um, the concept that taking things one little bit or one little piece at a time so you can see what everything adds up to, like um, is not just for a non-speaking autistic person, but pretty much for any autistic person. Like I very much related to the description of like going through different steps to understand that it's raining outside, which may sound weird, but um, that's that one sentence in the poem just got me thinking of all of that.
Yeah, the poem reminded me of my nephew. He's autistic. He's verbal and but when he does this, like he'll squeeze his eyes together, and it's like you're capturing the moments because if you keep, it all comes in, it's too much, right? You get nothing. It's just sensory overload. but kind of like, if you're standing at the Grand Canyon and you squish your fingers, you're like, oh, that's the Grand Canyon. It just it shrinks it down to little manageable bites. And I think that's interesting. The poem really does capture that, the moment. And yeah. I know for me, being kind of a little neuro weird that's similar to kind of how I see things, is like I try to focus on the things that I can instead of like everything all at once.
All right. Any final thoughts on this topic? I wanted to thank Nathan for joining us and sharing those poems and providing so many great suggestions. And I hope you all join us next month for Yoko Ono Spotlight. And I think Michael Gill will be joining us and talking about his completely wacko experiments that I just love. Yeah, and I agree with you, Jen, in the chat. Like, thank you all for creating this space. It felt so awesome to be in community with all of you poets. And we could do this topic so many times, and there's so many poems. So it was hard to narrow it down, but I'm glad we got to focus on this. Yeah. Thank you all for joining. Have a great night.
Thank you, Nathan. Love your poetry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Good
Yeah,
night.
thank you, Nathan, and thank you, March. Have a great night.
Thanks.